Amara was only 23 when her world shattered. Her husband, the love of her life, died suddenly in an accident in Nairobi. She thought at least her family would stand by her in this dark hour, but instead, they turned against her. Her own parents called her a burden, threw her and her little boy out on the streets, and told her never to come back. That night, as the rain fell and her child cried in her arms, Amara realized she had no one. The pain of losing her husband was heavy, but the betrayal of her parents cut even deeper. With nowhere to go, she walked to her husband's family home, expecting rejection. But when Mama Thandi, her mother-in-law, opened the door, she pulled Amara close and said, "You are my daughter now." Though the family had little, they shared everything with her. For the first time since the tragedy, Amara felt love and dignity. That kindness lit a fire inside her heart. Living under one roof with her in-laws, she began sewing small clothes to earn money. Her designs grew popular, and soon, women from the city wanted her work. Amara's tiny business turned into one of the biggest fashion brands in East Africa. Years later, when her parents lost everything and came to her mansion begging for help, she remembered that night on the streets. Calmly, she showed them papers proving the land they had stolen was now hers. Turning to her son and Mama Thandi, she whispered, "Family is who feeds you when you are starving." Amara stood outside the gates of her husband's family home, her son tied to her back, her eyes swollen from tears. She had nowhere else to go. Her parents had thrown her out, the streets were cold and unkind, and every step felt heavier than the last. In her heart, she expected rejection. She imagined her in-laws would blame her for their son's death, would tell her to leave, would say she didn't belong. But still, with trembling hands, she knocked on the rusty gate. For a moment there was silence, then the door opened, and Mama Thandi, her late husband's mother, stepped out. Amara lowered her eyes in shame, ready to beg for just a night of shelter. But before she could speak, Mama Thandi rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her. She held Amara tight, as though she were her own daughter. Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. She could not believe it. At a time when her own blood had cast her aside, this woman who owed her nothing opened her arms and her home. Life inside Mama Thandi's small house was not easy. The roof leaked when it rained, food was never enough, and every day was a struggle. But what they lacked in money, they gave in love. They ate from the same plate, laughed around the same fire, and shared the same hope. Amara had never known such kindness. It was a sharp contrast to the cruelty of her parents, and it lit a fire in her heart. She promised herself that one day she would rise, not only for herself and her son, but for this family who had chosen her when no one else would. Mama Thandi treated her like her own child. She encouraged Amara to start sewing again, reminding her of the little skills she had. When Amara stitched torn clothes for neighbors, Mama Thandi praised her work, telling everyone in the village that Amara's hands carried magic. Slowly, people began to notice. Women came with old dresses, asking her to fix them. Then some asked for new designs. Amara worked late into the night with nothing but a tiny lamp, her son sleeping beside her. Each time she felt tired, she remembered the day she was thrown into the street, the sound of her father's voice calling her a burden. Instead of breaking her, the memory pushed her to prove them wrong. And each time she looked at Mama Thandi, she felt strength. This woman's kindness had watered her broken soul, and now something new was beginning to grow. Amara's heart burned with gratitude and determination. She was no longer just a widow abandoned in the rain. She was a fighter, a dreamer, and she knew that one day the world would see her worth. What started as rejection had turned into a gift. In the arms of her mother-in-law, she found the family she had always longed for, and in that home of little, she discovered the seeds of greatness. The little house where Amara lived with her in-laws was crowded and poor, but it was filled with love. Every morning she woke to the sound of chickens and the smell of porridge cooking on the fire. Life was not easy, yet for the first time she felt she had a place to belong. Her son played with his cousins, and Mama Thandi treated her like a daughter. Still, Amara knew she could not live only on their kindness. She wanted to stand on her own feet. She started with small things. Using an old sewing machine that squeaked with every turn, she mended torn shirts and patched school uniforms for neighbors. At first, the pay was little, just a few coins, sometimes a basket of maize. But each stitch gave her confidence. Her hands remembered the craft she once loved. Mama Thandi watched her carefully and said, "Amara, your gift is bigger than you think." Those words became fuel in her heart. Soon, women in the village asked for more than repairs. They wanted new dresses, bright and beautiful, for weddings and celebrations. Amara began sketching her own designs on pieces of old paper. She added bold colors, patterns that spoke of her people, and cuts that made women feel proud when they wore them. Each dress she made brought more attention, and whispers about her talent spread beyond the village. Mama Thandi was her loudest supporter. She told visitors from the city, "My daughter can sew anything, just wait and see." One day, a trader passing through bought 2 of Amara's dresses to sell in Nairobi. Weeks later, he returned with news: the dresses were gone in a day, and people wanted more. Amara's heart raced. Could her work truly reach the capital? From that moment, she worked without rest. She sewed deep into the night, her fingers sore, her eyes heavy, but her spirit alive. By day she was a mother, by night she was a dreamer turning cloth into art. The little lamp on her table became her closest friend, glowing while the rest of the village slept. Each stitch was not only for survival but also for revenge against the words that once crushed her: burden. She was no burden. She was building something the world could not ignore. Orders multiplied. Traders carried her designs to markets far away. Her name began to travel with them, whispered in places she had never seen. Amara, the widow who had been thrown away, was now creating beauty that reached the capital city. The climb was slow, but every step filled her with power. She remembered the cold streets where she once stood with nothing, and it pushed her to never give up. With Mama Thandi cheering her, with her son watching proudly, Amara knew her story was no longer about loss. It was about rising, one stitch at a time, until the whole world could see her strength. Amara's small sewing table had turned into a fashion empire. What began with mending clothes in a tiny village grew into one of the biggest fashion brands in East Africa. Her designs, full of color and culture, walked the runways of Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Kampala. Women wore her dresses with pride, and men spoke her name with respect. Reporters called her the face of resilience. Investors lined up at her door, offering money and deals. For the first time in her life, Amara was not just surviving, she was shining. She moved her family into a mansion with wide gates and marble floors, a house so grand that villagers traveled just to see it. Her son went to the best schools, and Mama Thandi, once struggling to feed her family, now lived like a queen. Amara made sure the woman who had lifted her up tasted every blessing that came her way. Together they laughed, prayed, and remembered the nights when they had almost nothing. But success carried whispers, and not all of them were kind. One evening, Amara overheard a conversation at a party. Someone said, her parents must be proud of her. The word struck her like a blade. She learned that her parents, the same people who had abandoned her in the rain, who had called her a burden, now spoke of her as their successful daughter. They told neighbors how they had raised her with values, how they had always believed in her. They erased the cruel truth with smooth lies, painting themselves as proud parents of a star. At first, Amara felt anger rise like fire in her chest. She remembered the night she knocked on their door, begging for help, and how they threw her out with her little boy. She remembered her father's cold voice saying she was dead to them. And now those same lips praised her name, claiming her success as theirs. But Amara did not let her anger destroy her. Instead, she worked harder. She let her success speak louder than their lies. Every new design, every award, every runway show was proof of her strength. She no longer needed to prove herself to her parents. She had already proven herself to the world. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet, the pain returned. She wondered how people who gave her life could also give her such deep scars. She looked at Mama Thandi and her son and reminded herself that true family is not always blood, it is love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Her parents' betrayal was a wound that never fully healed, but it became part of her story. It made her stronger, sharper, and hungrier to succeed. And while her parents spoke of her with false pride, the world knew the truth. The woman they had abandoned was now a symbol of power, and no lie could erase the past they had written in her tears. The rain was falling hard that night, beating against the tall gates of Amara's mansion. She was in her study, working on sketches for her next fashion line, when the phone by her side rang. It was the guard at the gate. His voice carried both confusion and urgency. "Madam," he said, "there are people here asking for you." Amara frowned, wondering who could be standing outside in such a storm. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked slowly to the entrance. As the gates opened, the sight before her stopped her cold. Standing there in the rain were two figures she knew too well, her parents. The very same parents who had once spat her out, who had left her and her little boy on the streets like garbage. Now they stood trembling, their clothes soaked, their faces tired and worn. They looked nothing like the proud people she remembered. Her father, once a man with a booming business, had lost everything. Debts had swallowed his house, shame had eaten his pride, and now he was nothing but a broken man leaning on his equally broken wife. "Amara," her mother whispered, her voice shaking, "please, we have nowhere else to go." Her father, his eyes downcast, finally spoke, "Daughter, we need your help. You are our only hope." Amara felt her chest tighten. Memories flooded back, the night they had called her a burden, the way they had shut their door in her face, the coldness in her father's words when he told her to never return. And now, years later, here they were, begging for the same mercy they had denied her. Behind her, Mama Thandi appeared, standing tall and firm, her hands on her hips. She looked at the couple and said with a steady voice, "Hope. You threw her away. When you called her nothing, we picked her up. When you left her starving, we gave her bread." Her words sliced through the night air like lightning. The neighbors, drawn by curiosity, had begun to gather outside, their umbrellas forming a small crowd. Whispers spread quickly, everyone could see the truth unfolding at Amara's gate. Amara's parents wept, their dignity shattered. Her mother reached out a trembling hand, but Amara did not move. She looked at them with calm eyes, her heart heavy but steady. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of what she would say if they ever returned. But now she realized she didn't need shouting or curses. Her silence carried more power than their tears. She turned to her guard and nodded. The gates slowly closed as her parents cried out her name, their voices mixing with the sound of the rain. Amara stood still until the gates shut completely. She breathed deeply, turned back toward her mansion, and walked inside. At her side was Mama Thandi, and waiting for her was her son. In that moment, Amara knew the truth: family is not the people who abandon you when you're weak, but the ones who stand by you when you have nothing at all. The rain poured harder as Amara's parents fell to their knees at the gate, their voices breaking as they cried out, "Daughter, please, you are our only hope." Their words echoed against the mansion walls, heavy and desperate. Amara stood in silence, staring at the two people who had once turned their backs on her when she needed them most. She could see the shame in their eyes, the hunger on their faces, and the tremble in their hands. The mighty parents who had once called her a burden were now begging her for mercy. Behind her, Mama Thandi stepped forward, her voice steady and sharp. "Hope," she said firmly. "You threw her away like trash. When you abandoned her and that little boy, it was us who picked her up. It was us who gave her shelter, love, and a chance to rise again." The word struck like thunder, cutting through the sound of the rain. Amara's parents lowered their heads, unable to answer. By now, neighbors had gathered outside the gates. They whispered to each other, pointing, shaking their heads. The story of Amara's rise was already well known, but tonight they were witnessing the truth with their own eyes. The same parents who had once mocked and abandoned her were now on their knees, while the woman they had despised had become a queen in her own right. Amara's heart pounded. She remembered every detail of her past, her father's voice calling her a curse, her mother's eyes cold with rejection, the night she slept in the rain with her son in her arms. And then she looked at Mama Thandi, who had given her warmth, food, and dignity when she had nothing. In that moment, the difference between blood and love was crystal clear. Blood had betrayed her. Love had saved her. Her parents reached out again, tears streaming down their faces. "Forgive us, Amara," her mother whispered. "We are your family. We have nowhere else to go." But Amara no longer saw them as family. She saw them as strangers who had written her off, only to return when life turned against them. The whispers of the neighbors grew louder. Some murmured, "How could parents do that?" Others said, "Mama Thandi is her real mother now." The weight of the scene was undeniable. Everyone there knew the truth: family is not just who gives you life, but who stands with you when life tries to break you. Amara felt no anger, only clarity. She stepped closer to her son, who was watching everything with wide, innocent eyes. She wanted him to learn this lesson, to understand it deeply. She looked at him, then at Mama Thandi, and finally back at her broken parents. Love makes a family, she thought, her heart calm and sure. And as the rain washed over the night, Amara knew she would never forget the clash of her past and her present, the moment she chose love over blood forever. The rain was still falling, dripping from the tall gates as Amara stood quietly, her face calm though her heart was heavy. Her parents knelt before her, soaked and shaking, begging for help. The neighbors pressed closer, their whispers rising with every passing second. Everyone expected Amara to shout, to cry, to curse them for the pain they had caused. But Amara did none of that. Instead, she walked forward slowly, her eyes steady, her steps graceful, as if she had already made her choice long ago. Her father reached out his trembling hands, waiting for money, waiting for mercy. Amara smiled faintly, not with joy, but with strength. She held out a plain brown envelope. Her father's eyes lit up for a moment, thinking it was the rescue he desperately wanted. With shaky fingers, he tore it open, expecting bundles of notes. But as the papers slid out into his wet hands, the truth struck him like lightning. They were not money. They were eviction papers. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The neighbors leaned in, their eyes wide, their mouths open in shock. Mama Thandi stood tall, her arms crossed, her face firm with justice. Amara's father looked down at the documents, his face draining of color. They were the legal papers proving that the land he had once stolen from his son-in-law's family was no longer his. That land had been taken back, reclaimed, and rebuilt, not by lawyers, not by luck, but by the very girl he had thrown away. Her mother covered her mouth, her tears mixing with the rain. Her father shook his head, unable to speak. The empire they had once thought belonged to them, the land they had grabbed with pride, had risen from the ashes under Amara's hands. She had rebuilt it into something greater than they ever imagined. And now, with one simple envelope, she reminded them of the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The whispers around the gate grew louder. "It's justice," someone said. "She gave them what they deserve." Others nodded, clapping softly, then louder, until the sound of approval rose above the rain. Amara stood tall, her son's small hand gripping hers, his eyes fixed on her with pride. Her father dropped the papers to the ground, his voice breaking. "Amara, please, we are your parents." But she only looked at him with calm eyes that no longer held pain. Parents, she thought to herself. Parents don't abandon their child in the storm. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence, her strength, and that single envelope spoke louder than any curse could. The whole city would remember this night. The girl who had once been called a burden had become the queen of her own empire, and those who betrayed her now stood defeated at her gate, holding the proof of their downfall in their trembling hands. The heavy gates closed slowly, the sound echoing in the rain as Amara's parents cried out one last time. Their voices faded into the night, swallowed by the storm. Amara stood still, watching until the iron doors shut completely, and then she turned away. Her son was waiting, his small eyes wide as if he had just witnessed a lesson greater than anything taught in school. Mama Thandi stood tall beside her, her face calm but proud, the face of a woman who had once lifted Amara from nothing and given her a home when no one else would. Amara bent down, touched her son's cheek gently, and whispered words he would carry for life. Family isn't who gives you blood, it's who gives you bread when you're starving. Her voice was soft, but the words carried power. Mama Thandi's eyes glistened, and the boy nodded as though he understood every bit of it. Outside the gates, the neighbors who had gathered broke into cheers. They clapped, they shouted her name, their voices rising above the rain. To them, Amara was no longer just a widow, no longer the girl who had once been abandoned and humiliated. She was now a queen in her own right, a woman who had turned pain into power and betrayal into triumph. That night, the story spread through the city like fire. People spoke of the young woman who had been left to die but rose higher than anyone imagined. They spoke of the parents who once rejected her and now knelt at her gate, begging for mercy they never gave. Amara became more than a designer, more than a success story, she became a symbol of strength. And as she walked back inside with her son's hand in one hand and Mama Thandi's in the other, she knew the truth was clear to all: blood may betray, but love will always build a kingdom.